Hello, so just a trade recap from today's Asia session, which was Tuesday night on New York till Monday night, technically New York session. Also look at London. Essentially, went into this session, was quite bullish. Price had already expanded higher. You had multiple highs above us, multiple sell sides. In this case, that price was hunting, still in this hunting phase, so essentially it's more bullish. I did like the idea of maybe taking a short up here purely because you're in a discount, or you're in a discount for shorts or in a premium for longs. Makes anything going long just a bit lower probability, but essentially I was way more bullish. Kind of made more sense. Initially around the first macro, S&P macro, we took this high. Essentially, there was no bearish setups given. We just kept on expanding higher most of the session. Nothing really much given to us. Not until not until after the Asia macro open did I start to get an idea of what price may do. What I did like is we did have hourly fair value gap here. We started kind of generating this low resistance liquidity up here. Kind of had all these little highs that were just really stacked up in there. So essentially, wasn't quite sure if price wanted to go down or up at this point, but I liked the idea of this to be some sort of generated high. What we did see is we saw quite an exceptional movement down here. We took some sort of form of liquidity, and then what we had here is we had this kind of sharp manipulation leg down here, and it was followed by assisted entry. So essentially I used the standard deviation to give me kind of a profit target. I didn't like the risk. I didn't like essentially, when I looked at this setup, I only really saw maybe 25 points. So essentially I was looking for just a bit more of a move. I was looking for maybe standard deviations, of course, take me something close up into this high here. I was looking for that expansion there. So I believe I waited for the re-entry back into this fair value gap. I was targeting something like up here, and I put my stop in here, this area. So again, took the entry on the CISD, retested in 1 minute fair value. In this case, price really just kind of didn't want to make this movement higher initially. What we did is we started repricing down, and at this point I was literally maybe a couple ticks from getting stopped out. I just let the setup run. I kind of didn't really care that much about it. We eventually reclaimed assisted. We kind of had our own little market maker buy model in here, a little nice 1 minute inverse fair value gap, and we saw this movement higher eventually. It took a while, but eventually we did get that higher movement up. Took quite a while for it to expand though. Essentially I did plan to hold this setup a bit longer, but we came into the 10 o'clock macro and we kind of just slowed down quite a lot. So I think I just took my setup, took it off here. It wasn't the greatest execution, but it worked. Worked purely because trend in the draw was higher. It was kind of just a really nice manipulation, displacement, or accumulation, manipulation, displacement. And what we did eventually get is we just got this expansion down where I would have taken up my stop. So yeah, that was Asia for this session. Had a bullish bias, had a bullish trade, worked. We move on. Going into London for today's session. Come back into it. So what we did is we took liquidity before London session. Essentially before London open around the 2 a.m. macro candle, new 4 a.m. candle, we took pretty much the main kind of two sell side targets we had. And at this point here I was more bearish. This time here I was more bearish. Essentially I was looking, kind of just made sense to see some sort of lower prices here. Kind of had these stack lows down here. We also had 4-hour fair value down here as well, so it kind of made sense to see some sort of reprice back down. I was at the gym at the time London happened, so I didn't really look at anything. Kind of had a glance at it initially. What we did have is we had this 5-minute inverse fair value gap set up here. Doesn't confirm initially, but what it does do is it takes a form of a high, does take sell side in the 3 a.m. candle, and eventually we do see this kind of movement down. Probably would have looked for some sort of setup like this, 5-minute inverse fair value gap, put your stop down here, and you're targeting these lows down at the midnight open. That was probably the best thing that I saw. Looking back at London, don't believe we quite got that expansion down though, or if we did, it took quite a while for it to go off. But that's how I kind of would have looked at London. Didn't really give us the expansion that we wanted down. So yeah, that's how I would have looked at London. Probably looked for these lows. The only other thing you probably could have targeted is probably just the equilibrium of this range, but it kind of didn't make sense considering this. You could have taken this much smaller time frame trade on the 1 minute and then taken the equilibrium of this move, this last expansion move up, back down to 2300. That would have been 40-point setup, which would have worked nicely, but London, kind of you in a premium, you wanted shorts. 3 a.m. macro kind of gave that initial manipulation leg. Price kind of just expanded to the equilibrium of that last expansion range though. So cool,